latest webinar and the first under the heading of Desert Island Dishes. I'm Jackie Pickles and I'm the current president of LDE London. And for those of you who don't know who we are and what we stand for, we are the London chapter of LDEI, Les Dames d'Escoffier International. It's a philanthropic organisation founded over 40 years ago for women working in the culinary fields. We raise money for charity, we support each other, and we mentor those new to our profession. There are over 2,500 members worldwide, mainly in the US, but we're one of the few international chapters, and we're a group of about 35 in London. Always looking for new members, so do please look us up and get in touch for further information if that interests you. You'll find us at lesdamslondon.org. So, how many times has some bright spark round a dinner table decided that the conversation needs a bit of a boost and we should discuss our last suppers or our death row dinners? For me, that changes constantly depending on my mood, what I've just eaten, or maybe what I haven't eaten for a while. But this theme is not death related at all, and quite the opposite. And it's all about the food that has enhanced or otherwise affected the lives of our guests, both from a personal point of view and in their culinary careers. So it is indeed my pleasure to lead you into what promises to be a really interesting discussion today between two titans in our profession. Many thanks to Sheila and to Prue. Sheila Dillon, who over 20 years has been the voice of Radio 4's The Food Programme and founder of the BBC Food and Farming Awards, and Prue Leith, whose schedule must be so tightly packed and whose culinary career goes on, which she and Sheila will be talking about. And if you don't mind my saying, Prue, you just look better and better. You are an inspiration on many levels. So, if there's time at the end of their discussion, Prue, I'm sure, will be happy to answer questions. So please pop those into the chat and we'll try and reach those. Now, on any of our webinars, we try to raise awareness and funds for a food-related charity. And today we're linking with the charity My Grateful. So I'm going to hand you over to Ryan Horsford, who is the head of business and development at My Grateful, and he's just going to tell you a little bit about the charity before we kick off. So over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Jackie. My name is Ryan. I'm the head of business development at My Grateful, and I just want to give you a quick insight into who we are, what we do, and I suppose the impact that we're trying to create over here. I think for me, I'll get into that first. I spent quite a lot of time in Tanzania, and I say Tanzania because over there they accentuate the second syllable of the name, so Tanzania, and that was kind of the first time where I experienced being an outsider. I experienced me having a communication barrier. And what that did is it stopped me from being able to do things like get on buses and, you know, travel on public transport. And that was where I understood that this, for me, is something that I can go back home and be absolutely okay and escape that. But for some people, they can't escape that language barrier. They can't escape the difference. They can't escape the social hurdles that they might have to face that stops them from integrating. And that was where I had a first-hand understanding of what it is like in some capacity, just a fraction of being a refugee, migrant, or asylum seeker. And I suppose that's where that's what resonated with me about My Grateful, and that's why it was the right organization for me to be part of. But now let me tell you a little bit about how it started. Jess, our CEO, she was doing volunteering with refugees, and on one of the projects that she was running, there was a conversation amongst all of the refugee women that she was working with at the time, and they were having a conversation about their lives and, you know, the journey that they've been on. And most of these women were highly qualified, really capable, but as a result of being in a country that didn't necessarily recognize their qualifications or the communication barrier, they were unemployed and not able to use the talents that they have. So in that discussion, they said, well, do you know what, it would be really nice for us to be able to share some of our cultural cuisines. And at that point, that's when Jess said, you know what, maybe we can facilitate some sort of social cohesion here. And I think that then brings us on to the impact that we actually have, and where it is that I suppose we solve problems. And there are two main areas, and that's for our refugee chefs that we work with. It provides them with a sense of belonging in an environment that doesn't necessarily welcome them all the time. It gives them, you know, we have feedback with, you know, from our chefs saying that it made them feel human again, having a sense of networking, potential job opportunities and business opportunities for them. They go through an extensive duration of chef training, you know, so we provide so many benefits for our chefs. That's on one level. On the second level, where we do things like corporate events and stuff like that, what happens there is we're able to bring together two different demographics and shatter the stigma that's attached to being a migrant. And this is where we create that impact with demographics of people who wouldn't otherwise actually interact on a day-to-day. And this is where we provide value. I would say, obviously, because I don't want to take up too much time, that's giving you an insight into My Grateful and what we do and how we create some sort of value and impact. I would say the ways in which that you can help is obviously to donate millions of pounds to help us with our mission. But, you know, things like gift cards, buying a gift card that enables a friend or someone that will value a gift card to come to one of our online classes, our in-person classes. You can donate directly, or you can, you know, choose My Grateful for one of your corporate events. But yeah, no, thank you again for inviting My Grateful to be here and be part of this exercise. It's majorly appreciated.
Oh, well, you're most welcome, Ryan. It's a fabulous charity, and we wish you all the luck with that. Okay, well, let's get going. Sheila, I'm handing over to you and to Prue, and we're very much looking forward to it.
Hello and welcome indeed. I just want to say that My Grateful is remarkable. We've made programs with their help in Greek refugee camps and in Britain, and so, you know, send them your money. They need it and they use it really well. Anyway, here we are with Prue Leith, who I feel like, you know, it's one of those things, well, it hardly needs an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. She looms large in the public consciousness about food in Britain. And now she's speaking to the whole country as a judge on the Great British Bake Off. But she really has been shaping the national attitude to food for a long time. I mean, we know how long, because she proudly announced her 80th birthday a few months ago. And to slightly misquote Carole King, another female consciousness shaper who I watched not long ago dance, sing and play the piano on stage in high heels, this is what 80 looks like. And 80 and Prue Leith look and sound fantastic. And to every woman everywhere, she's an inspirer. But it's not all about food, because she is as much a businesswoman as she is a food hero. She founded a cooking school that still bears her name, then a Michelin-starred restaurant, and a catering business. She wrote 12 cookbooks and 8 novels, one just out, plus a memoir. She's been the chair of Slow Food for 5 years. At one point, she's not now. She founded Focus on Food, which helps promote food education and cooking in schools. And she set up the Hoxton Apprentice, a wonderfully successful catering school that I remember well for young people who'd had a raw deal in life, but which was destroyed, in my view, by short-sighted government cuts. In 2020, her review of NHS meals was published, showing, as she put it, it is possible to produce delicious meals in hospitals on a budget. And as I said, she's also a businesswoman, so she's been on the boards of numerous companies, including Whitbread, Safeway, British Rail, as well as a long list of charities, some related to food, some not. I won't go on because the woman is here. So let's hear from her. Is she daunting? Prue, that's my first question, really. Do you see yourself as daunting, or you know that's the effect you have on people?
You know, I think everybody thinks that they are, at least I certainly think that I'm an imposter. You know, I think it's amazing that I've achieved as much as I have, and I can never quite believe it. But I do think people find me intimidating. And I think it's because I'm very bossy and I'm quite straightforward and I have no tact at all. And so I can be a bit too unvarnished, shall we say.
You're also tall as well, aren't you?
Yes, I'm large in all directions.
Yeah. But you're tall. And, you know, I feel like my disadvantage in life is being short. So I'd envy you that as well as your CV. Some people might look at that CV and
Sorry.
I was going to
My mother said it was like having a horse in the house because I was so clumsy and big and I was always knocking things over.
Did you like her?
Did I what?
Did you like your mother?
I loved her. I absolutely loved her. She was an actress. She was very glamorous, and she wasn't as big as me. So, but she was a strong woman.
Oh, good. We like that. I was going to say your CV is remarkable, and you might look at it and say that you're driven and have phenomenal energy. Would that be accurate?
I think that's right. I think I am very energetic, and I often think that's just the luck of the draw, isn't it? I mean, I think I have two things that have made me successful. One is that I am very energetic and I get on with it. But that's just because I feel energetic. I wake up in the morning wanting to do stuff. And the other is that I'm very optimistic. I generally have a can-do attitude. And I think both of those things are God-given. I mean, you know, the can-do attitude or the optimism or the general glass half full attitude comes from the serotonin levels in your brain. It's not something that you can say, I will be a cheerful person. You just are. So I feel really sorry for people who, you know, are, you know, unhappy or depressed because it's not their fault. It's all about chemicals. So, but still, I'm very lucky. I have huge energy and I like life. And I've had a lovely life.
Well, that's a very good beginning. But let's go back, well, to where that did begin. I mean, you were born in South Africa, where you, well, you've already said your mother was an actress, so it gives us some indication of the kind of family you came from. I mean, and that was a weird 80 years ago, a weird time in South Africa. What were you like?
It was middle of apartheid. Apartheid was very strong. I mean, and I grew up in it. My mother was actually a campaigner against apartheid, and she was very liberal and used to stand on the town hall steps, you know, protesting about apartheid. And I remember her coming home with egg yolk splashed on her black overcoat because people had been throwing eggs at these women. It was a women's group called the Black Sash, and they were quite powerful, and they were all sorts of very well-known women, but it did no good because apartheid was so strong. So yes, I grew up in a liberal family, but in apartheid South Africa. My father was a top businessman. He was the director of a big company, a subsidiary of ICI, and he was good at business. So I suppose I take something of both of my parents. I'm sort of egotistical like my mother, you know, and quite like performing, like being the center of attention, all that. I think that comes from my mother. And my father, who thought I was completely flaky. Unfortunately, he died when I was 21. And by then I hadn't yet decided what I wanted to do. And I'd had a go at you know, I'd been to theatre school and then to art school and then to architecture school. And then I'd been to university to do a BA. And I had flunked out of all of them. And I think he just thought I was a dead loss, really. I mean, he loved me, but he didn't think much of my direction in life. And then he died. And even now, if something wonderful happens, or I remember when I won Businesswoman of the Year, or when I got a CBE, my first thought is, there you are, Dad, I'm not that flaky. And he's been dead for 50 years, more. It's crazy, isn't it?
Well, food, was that an important part of your childhood? I mean, if your mother was an actress, did you have much time for cooking and your father was a businessman? Or you had servants, probably.
We were a greedy family. I mean, we had lovely food. You know, being a well-off South African white family, we had a cook. He was a Zulu guy called Charlie. He was wonderful. And he cooked like a dream, but it never occurred to anybody that he could teach me to cook. Because I mean, my parents were just determined I'd go to university and I wouldn't be, you know, it never occurred to them to think about cooking. But we did eat very well. And my biggest treat was my father would sometimes take me out without my brothers, that was the point, on my own, just with my dad, to dinner. And we go to some amazing restaurant in Johannesburg, like the station buffet at the local railway station, because that was very smart, you know, waiters with red sashes across their white uniforms and white tablecloths down to the ground. And, you know, it seems to me the most glamorous thing in the world. But it didn't occur to me to be a cook until I got to France, where I had gone to learn, to learn French so that I could be a translator for the United Nations or something. I've got a problem in here. Shall I run and tell them to shut up?
That's the marvel of Zoom, isn't it? You enter into people's private lives.
I'm so sorry. So sorry. That's the problem with Zoom.
Before you get to France, Prue, because this is desert island dishes, is there something from that time that you remember that's one of your favorite foods, a desert island dish from South Africa?
Well, there are two dishes really, but the most obvious one is babouti, and many people in England will know babouti. It's a kind of slightly curried, like a shepherd's pie with a moussaka-like top, you know, rather than mashed potato on top. And it's an absolutely wonderful dish, and we always had it. My memories are mostly that we ate outside because Johannesburg has the best weather in the world. It's lovely, and so it's a lovely dish because you can make it in advance. It freezes well. It's lovely hot. It's delicious cold. You can eat it with salad, and most people have it with rice. And so that was my sort of childhood dish. But the one I think probably made me start to thinking about food seriously was snails in garlic butter, which of course the snails came in tins and the shells came in a box, and you added the garlic butter. But they just seemed to me the most glamorous thing, because if I went out with my dad, we would have these, and I loved the fact that they had these little fancy kind of implements to hold them with. You know, they're like a kind of scissor thing, and they hold the shell quite still while you hook out the snail. And of course it was the garlic butter that I was loving, but it seemed to me the most sophisticated thing in the world.
Still seems to be a pretty tasty dish, even out of a tin. Well, you said that you then got interested in food properly in France. So how did you went to learn to be a translator, but how did the interest in food develop?
Well, I think it just astonished me. First of all, I was au pair for a French family, and I couldn't believe. So of course I went shopping with Madame in the morning, and we would go to 3 different shops for the bread. You know, we'd go to one boulangerie for the bread, one for the croissant, and a third for the gâteau basque, because we were in Bayonne and they have this wonderful custard-filled cake called gâteau basque. And after a few days, I realized that every single one of these boulangeries all had all 3 of these products, which we bought every morning. And I said to her, why do we go to 3 shops when they all have? And she looked at me as if I was completely crazy. She said, because that one does the best croissant, that one does the best baguette, and that one does the best. And I thought, oh, food is really quite serious. And then in the evening when we were feeding the children, she would make, I remember the first time, she always gave the children exactly the same food that we got. So we were having steak that night, and she made tiny little steaks and seared them on both sides so they were rare in the middle and brown on the outside, and tiny little new potatoes, which she turned in butter, and salad, which she turned in French dressing, the salad laitue, just lettuce leaves. And we sat down, knees under the table, and I had the baby on my lap. And she looked after the 2-year-old who sat in a high chair, or 18-month-year-old. And the 18-month-year-old had her food cut up into little bits, and I liquidized exactly, everything went in together into the liquidizer, and I liquidized the food for the baby. And then we sat there and we talked to them. And it seemed to me to have everything that food should have, which is, food freshly cooked, minimally messed around with, healthy, and most important of all is that it was a social occasion which we took seriously and sat down. And I thought it's wonderful. The children are getting the same food as grown-ups. And I think that was probably another of the sort of impetuses to make me become a cook. She never let me cook, of course, because the very fact that I spoke English would guarantee that I would ruin the food.
So, but you moved then to London. Why move to London?
Well, I tried to go to the Cordon Bleu in Paris. I was actually at the Sorbonne doing this cours de la civilisation française, which is a wonderful course that basically teaches you everything from Bonaparte to Baudelaire. The whole French culture gets stuffed into a year, which was wonderful. But after that, I thought, well, I'll go to the Cordon Bleu, and I couldn't afford it. It was really expensive. So I went to London and came to the Cordon Bleu in London, which is not the same company, it's a different company. And I was staying with friends, so I could stay for free, which made a huge difference to the finances. And I only did the advanced course, and I have to confess that I cheated to get into the advanced course, because they would only take you at the Cordon Bleu if you'd done their intermediate course or you had been working in a restaurant, and because you were expected to know something by the time you did the advanced course. But I couldn't afford a whole year, and it was only a 3-month course, and I thought that's what I want to be able to do, is to say that I have done the advanced course at Cordon Bleu. So when they asked me what my experience was, I said I had worked in a restaurant in Paris, which was perfectly true, but the restaurant, I had washed up, carried plates, and occasionally was a waitress, but I had never ever cooked anything. I had not chopped an onion and done nothing there. So it was being economical with the truth. But anyhow, they took me. I think they must have been short of people at the time. And I had a very good friend who we cooked in pairs, and she ran a cafe. She had a cafe, and she wanted to turn it into a restaurant. She had a tea room, really, and she wanted to be a restaurant. So she was coming. She knew all about cake making, but she knew nothing about savory cooking. So she did most of the work, is what I mean.
And so you you're being economical with the truth. You weren't found out.
No, never. Mainly because she covered up for me. Right. But I learned fast. I'm a very fast learner, and I loved it because they were good teachers, and I was very keen. I did everything I was told, and it was a really good course. And then of course, like most courses, it gives you the basis to understand what you're doing, but you really start learning when you're out there and people are paying you for it, because you can't get it wrong when somebody's money is on the line, or your money is on the line. So I learned a lot because as soon as while I was still there, I started to do a few jobs, dinner parties for people. And I'll never forget the very first one I did. I did it with a friend, not the one I cooked with, but with another girl who was at the Cordon Bleu. And we had been asked to do it by the Cordon Bleu because people used to ring them up and ask teachers if they had free teachers who would do dinners for them. and they didn't have any teachers free. And so they said, we've got a couple of students who are keen, but they're only students. And she said, that's fine. And we went off and we did a dinner for her, which I'll never forget the menu. We did an egg mousse, which had anchovies on top in a crisscross pattern. And then we did a roast pheasant and a meringue, a sort of dacquoise meringue, hazelnut meringue cake. And it took us all one day to prepare it and get as far as we could, the whole of the next day to cook it, and we had to wash up and everything else. And we were so exhausted, I think more from the tension of the scariness of doing a dinner party, a real one, that we spent all the money we earned on a taxi home because we were so tired. So we made no money at all.
Then between the end of Cordon Bleu and you setting up your own school, what did you do?
Well, I thought the business of cooking for people grew into a catering company. And to be honest, the catering company is always the engine of my career because it was what made the money. And I started just doing people's dinner parties and running around London with a basket of tools in one hand and a basket of ingredients in the other. And that grew into starting to do people's cocktail parties and weddings and so forth. And in the end, by the time I opened a cookery school, which was about 12 years later, I was employing about 300 people. And by the time I sold the business, I had 500 people working in the catering side. And so by then we had contracts like the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre and the Edinburgh Conference Centre and the Orient Express train, did all the food for that. And we did a lot of big, and that is what really does well, is when you get lots of bums on seats. My brother has always said to me that that I would rather cook a good meal for 1,000 people than an exquisite meal for 4 people. And he's absolutely right. I like the logistics of it. I like the excitement of it. I like the tension. And I really can't be doing with fiddling around with tweezers, putting micro leaves on top of perfect swirls of something.
So that was the 60s and 70s, right? What was food in general in London like then? I mean, were you at the cutting edge?
The 70s was what made the difference. Up till the 60s, 50s and 60s was post-war Escoffier. It was French dominated. Everything had all the menus were written in French, but they weren't cooked with the attention that Escoffier would have done. I mean, interestingly, what had happened, 2 world wars had meant that people could no longer get the reams of staff that they would have had to push sauces laboriously through a muslin cloth. But they hadn't yet got the machines that we have today that can do that in a flash. So they didn't have the equipment and they didn't have the staff. So everything was shortcuts. I mean, it was just appalling. And I'd come from South Africa, which obviously had a base of British cooking in it from years back, but where there was still labor. And so the food in South Africa was actually better by and large in hotels. I felt anyway. Hotels tended to have waiters they were all very smartly dressed, but they'd come around, they'd have these stainless steel divided dishes with 3 veg in them. 2 of them would be potatoes and 1 of them would be something green, usually overcooked cabbage. And whatever you'd ordered, whether you'd ordered the salmon and somebody else had ordered the pheasant and somebody else had ordered the duck, you all got the same veg, plom, plom, plom on it. And the meat, by and large, was pre-cooked and dressed in what I used to call sauce industrielle, sort of brown gravy. And the same brown gravy seemed to go on everything. So it was really unimaginative. And every menu was the same. They always started with melon frappé, which just means iced melon. And, the chef du pâté du chef, which just means chef's pâté, which was, terrine or pâté of some sort. and the menus were so unimaginative, and you never saw a mango, because nobody was importing exotic fruit. You might have tinned pineapple and tinned figs, but that was about as exotic as it got. And then what really changed it completely was, hang on, I'm trying to, darling, can you not do that, please? Sorry. What really changed things completely was the arrival of Nouvelle cuisine. You know, the great revolution of Nouvelle cuisine happened in the 70s. It started in the 60s, it didn't touch England until the 70s. And that was astonishing. You know, that was, I mean, if you want a dish for Nouvelle cuisine, it would have been something like the Trois Gros sorbets, which today don't sound remarkable at all, but they made sorbet out of absolutely freshly pressed puree, fruit puree, let's say a raspberry puree, a melon puree, and coconut or something. And they would spoon it in these sort of cannelle shapes, you know, sort of egg-shaped blobs, put 3 of them on a dish with really, with a few fresh raspberries or perfect strawberries. And that was it. And they were so amazing because nobody did that. Ice cream was Wall's ice cream, and it was vanilla, and it had hot chocolate sauce on it, or you might get a banana split if you were lucky. So
but that was an influence on you at the catering company?
Yes, enormously. I mean, I was really keen. I always, partly because I'd lived in France and I realized that they were more imaginative and, you know, they had a better reputation for cooking altogether. And Paul Bocuse was the great hero of the time. He's just died, sadly, but he sort of led this bunch of chefs, and they were the first chefs who owned their own restaurants. Up till then, most chefs had been employed by big hotels. The smart restaurants were always in big hotels. But these guys were the first who became chef patron, and they saw food from the customer's angle. So they made it look really pretty and put it on a plate. And they would cook it at the last minute, and they'd concentrate on fresh ingredients, and they didn't reheat stuff. And they believed in empty fridges and empty larders, which I am very keen on. I'm the leftover queen because I like to have an empty fridge. So I use my leftovers as quickly as I can. So all that freshness and simplicity, and also making the most of exotic fruits, things like mangoes and kiwi and so on. Of course, it got a bad reputation in the end. Like most great revolutions, somebody takes it up and overdoes it, you know, and there would, you know, things going on like, I don't know, you know, do you remember avocado pear with raspberry vinaigrette, which was sort of like raspberry puree all over the avocado pear, which is disgusting. But in the hands of the wrong people, all these ideas could be overdone.
But that must have really been a big contributor to the success of your catering company. I mean, you had, you know, the ground was open for you then, you know, if 2 kinds of potato and cabbage with Bisto glossy grave industrial sauce industrielle, you know, they must have gone Leith's.
Well, yes, and we were, because, you know, now there are, I mean, now it's, there are wonderful catering companies who do most amazing things, much better than I ever did. But my catering company, for its time, was well ahead of the game. And I remember one of the things that got us into the conference world, you know, with the Queen Elizabeth Conference Centre, which was a terrific risk at the time to take on that contract, because it meant I had to double this. I had 25 staff at the time, and it meant doubling the staff, because we need at least 25 people in the conference centre. And it was, you know, it was really scary because it was a brand new building and we were relying on the Foreign Office who owned it to fill it. You know, we weren't in charge of the marketing. And so we were relying on somebody to deliver us the customers, which was really scary. But I think one of the reasons we did so well was we thought, and I still believe, that it's a great mistake to think of conference delegates as just not people, you know. And what was happening is that the people who organized conferences always tried to cut the costs of the catering because everything was all in. So the cheaper they could make the catering, the better. And I would say, look, if you've only got £5 a head, which I suppose in today's money, that would be £20 a head. But if you've only got £5 a head to spend on the customers, then then what I think you should have is a really good cheese board, or maybe a really good one-course soup, or really good spaghetti bolognese, and glass of wine. And that should be it. And they said, no, we want something grander than that. And people they were making these horrible canapes, which are very labor intensive. So they tend to be the worst ingredients because you've got to save money on something. And there'd be things like tinned asparagus rolled up in brown bread and really boring little sandwiches and so on. And I just kept saying, let's spend the money on the quality of the ingredients and not on the labor. And I think we got a hugely good reputation for delegate catering. And then,
I mean, that's terribly important. I mean, it's to think delegate people, yes. I mean, is there one dish from that time, you know, let's have another desert island dish from that time as a caterer that...
I think the thing that we got really well known for in the catering side was Casserole, because it was a dish that that was hardly known in England. And it's a wonderful casserole. I mean, you can basically put anything in it. And we used to put duck or lamb, and so it was very rich and lots of beans in it. And it's not that expensive to make, especially if you make it with lamb and sausages rather than duck and whatever. And so I think the casserole was quite good. But I think the dish that I remember mostly from my catering days was when the Rainbow Theatre was renovated by a friend of mine, and the first concert to be in the Rainbow Theatre was with The Who, Keith Moon and co. And they were famous for breaking up places, you know. Anyway, so everybody was very excited that the first concert was going to be them, and I was doing the catering. So we decided we would do pizza. Nobody had heard of pizza. It was before Pizza Express came and taught us about pizza. And so I made pizza in huge baking trays, square. And we couldn't sell these things. And all these young people came to the concert. They said, what's that? What's that? So we ended up cutting them into squares and folding them together like a sandwich. And we sold them as sort of tomato sandwiches, tomato and cheese sandwiches, and you know, explained they were like a sandwich and it was toasted. And then I could sell them, but I couldn't sell them as an open-topped pizza with olives. And anyway, it was a time when, you know, food was changing so fast. It was very exciting, lovely.
But then, you know, you got to the point where, as you said, you sold the catering company, you sold the school, you know, you moved on. What was what caused that? I mean, there you are, you're an enormous success. You're getting rich. Your dad would be proud of you.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, when I look back on my life, I realized that every 25 years, I seem to need a revolution in my life. You know, you spend 25 years basically growing up, don't you, and getting your education and getting taught stuff. And then I spent 25 years in food, in restaurants, catering, and the cookery school. But all the time I was writing cookery books, and I felt that was part of, you know, just because I was in food. I was so deeply in food that and I've always been a writer as well. So I was writing cookery books, and then I realized that what I really wanted to write was a novel. And I did think that actually it was one thing writing cookery books on Fridays. By that time I was working, I was in London Monday to Thursday, but on Fridays I wrote cookery at home or did the business reports, so I worked at home. And I realized I couldn't add writing a novel to this schedule. So I thought, well, actually, I've done it for 25 years. It's very successful. And my husband, who was nearly 20 years older than me, was heading for 70, and I was heading for 50. And so I thought, well, why don't I sell the business and I'll be at home and be with him, because he wasn't very well. And I will be able to write my famous novel that's been buzzing around in my head for all these years. So that's the motivation was to write the novel and to spend more time with Rain at home. And so that's what I did. And then I did that for 25 years. I basically wrote 8 novels and an autobiography and memoir. And I loved it. I mean, the thing is, that's the thing about being sort of chirpy about stuff. I like that. And then I got very involved in charitable stuff as well. And I became more, because I had more time, I became very interested in business ethics and stuff and started sitting on PLC boards. So I sat on all sorts of fancy company boards. And today, honestly, they wouldn't have me today, because in those days, you were appointed by the chairman. And if the chairman used to come to my restaurant and think, well, I need a woman on the board. And Prue obviously knows something about business, so we'll ask her. I mean, they wouldn't even interview me. So I got all these jobs and I loved them because I love interfering in other people's business. And the first one was British Rail. I was on the British Rail board. I'm mad. Would never happen today.
Well, I'm being chivied a bit to move on so that people can ask you their questions. But I want, you got on all these boards and as you say, you were sometimes the token woman, but that suited you because you could interfere and be bossy. But one of the things that interests me looking through your CV is that suddenly, that you'd had this catering company, you'd had the restaurant, and then you got involved with the food as it ties into social change, that Clink, School Food Trust, Channel 4's Poverty Commission, Training for Life. What was it that made you think, okay, food, but connected with the bigger things?
Well, it was so obvious to me that the people that I was employing, if they came from poor backgrounds, they were there not because they loved food or because they'd had good food at home, but because some career officer said, you're too stupid for the army, you better go into food, into catering. And I realized that we were not, that chefs were just not valued properly. And yet it's a skill that is so vital to life and so vital to health. Cooking is just, I became obsessed with the idea that cooking was what glued families together, that good food is, you talk to your children if you sit down with them, the best gift you can give your child is an appetite for good food, as in healthy food, and it's a real pleasure. And that it was just being scorned generally by the establishment. In the 60s, Harold Wilson said, the white heat of technology was going to save the world. And in a way it did, because we became a great technical country. But he thought that it would save women from cooking and washing up and shopping. It would just be wonderful. We'd just buy everything in. And I thought that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So it was really that started me on trying to get more cooking in schools. And I realized that we were losing food teachers. We still are, by the way, because nobody values it enough. And although they were being made to do design and technology rather than cooking. And so very often the kids didn't cook at all. They just designed packaging and stuff. So I just think it's wrong, and I still do. And I've been bleating away at saying the same thing for 50 years. But what is good that's happening now, of course, which you'll know about, is that there are many good things like the stuff that the Soil Association does, which I was very instrumental in the beginning with Food for Life in schools, because my charity, Focus on Food, was about teaching kids to cook, and theirs was about teaching kids to grow. So we put the two together to make Food for Life, and that's now in thousands of schools. So there's a lot of good stuff goes on.
A quick, you've been involved, as you say, with food in schools for a long time. Is there a school meal, you know, that maybe you've never even had, but, you know, the kind, it almost seems to me like the school food ought to be a bit like your catering food back then. If you don't have a lot of money, do a few simple good things.
I went to a school recently in Sheffield, which is a secondary school, and it's entirely vegetarian. Only except on Fridays they have fish, because they say fish is good for the brain. But this school is secondary school. Everybody sits down, they all eat together, and it's delicious. And the chef is amazing. And the meal I had there was a sort of, it was a taco. Children went on, picked up their as many tacos as they wanted, and then filled them with what they liked. But everything there was healthy and delicious. So they would be, you know, a sort of curried mince affair, or there'd be a vegetarian roasted vegetable affair, and then there'd be a bit of sour cream or guacamole or whatever. And I said, this is quite expensive food. You're using avocados and pineapple in the salsa. How can you do that? And they said, well, we don't buy meat, and the meat is what costs money. And so we can spend the money on red peppers and things that are a bit more expensive.
The other thing I want to mention before we go to the questions, I know we're falling a bit behind, but is, you know, in a year ago, I mean, not even a year ago, you did the review of NHS hospital meals, and you said, you know, it can be. And the wonderful thing about that, sorry. You've been pushing good hospital food for a long time against, and you must have felt like you were punching a sponge wall. I mean, do you think it's going to change now?
It is. It really is, Sheila. And the reason is, I mean, I didn't believe it either. When they asked me, I said, no, hundreds of people have tried. And, you know, what happens, you write a report, sits on a shelf, it gets dusty, another minister comes in, changes, money goes, you know, west, and you never see it happen. But this time, I didn't join it until I had the assurance from Boris Johnson, and more importantly from Matt Hancock, that they were hanging their hats on this thing, that they had to get food right, that food in hospitals had to get better. And we produced a report which had 8 recommendations that covered staff food and kitchens being closer to the customer and all the things you'd want to happen. And they accepted all 8 recommendations. And one of the most important ones was, first of all, the money for it. We've got to have the money, and that's coming, that's fine. And that we have a little committee that is driving this, and they're all from the NHS. The committee that did the report, everybody were doctors or nutritionists or people who worked in the NHS. So it'll be a bottom-up thing, and I'm absolutely convinced it'll work. And if it doesn't, I'll personally go and slit Boris Johnson's throat.
Oh, thank you. I could, you know, I have endless more questions, but I think we better go to answer some of the questions from our audience. What was a question from Elizabeth Luard? What was different about your contribution to male-dominated boards? Were your views treated with respect?
Hello, Liz. No, not always. You know, mostly men didn't realize that they were being misogynistic. I mean, I remember on the British Railways board, I decided to get all the women in management in British Rail together and come and talk to me. And they didn't really want to, because they had formed a little secret society called Women in British Rail Management, they were called. And they didn't want the board to know about them. And so they came and saw me, but they wouldn't come together. They came individually, because they said that, you know, they mustn't put their heads over the parapet. And in fact, their fears were sort of unfounded, but they were very real. I mean, for example, one woman told me that she had a very nice avuncular boss who didn't realize how patronizing he was being, but he would say things like, look, it's raining buckets out there, it's horrible. Why don't you sit in the corner in the warm and and answer the complaint letters, and I'll send Jack out to deal with chaps on track, because you don't get to the top by answering the complaint letters. You get to the top by dealing with chaps on track. And they just didn't see it, but you know, I'm a loudmouth, so they began to see it.
Carolyn Steele says, are you optimistic that food culture in the UK is travelling in the right direction?
I think it's travelling in the right direction and the wrong direction. I think the thing we all miss is that the gap between the rich and poor is widening because of all the reasons we know, that, you know, top pay goes up and bottom pay hardly moves. And so the poor are eating worse and worse. And the manufacturers are getting clever as anything at selling us sugar, fat, and salt in a way that is irresistible. And because we don't know how to cook, and you know, it's easier for the middle classes because they've got the money to regard cooking as a hobby. And they can afford to, even if they don't like cooking, they can afford to gallop down Waitrose shelves and have fresh pasta and a ready-made delicious sauce and even ready grated fresh Parmesan, and put together a delicious pasta and salad. But if you don't know anything about cooking at all, you can't do that. So, you know, we've got a long way to go. But I say the food trends are both good and bad.
Do you think that the fact that food, that kind of food you're describing, that is the result of inequality and that it is causing so much ill health, that there will be an economic push to take food more seriously, as you say it has been done in this NHS review, and also to change things?
I think so. You know, Henry Dimbleby is due to report his new second chunk of his national food strategy. And that was an enormously hard lump of work, which I think Michael Gove originally commissioned from Henry. And Henry it takes no prisoners. I mean, he won't trim stuff. And he will be very, very strong on the standards of importation, of the importance of food education. I mean, a lot is hanging on his shoulders, but I think he wouldn't have been asked to do it if there wasn't a desire in government, or a realization in government, that it's to grow up ever more unhealthy people, but who live longer than ever before, is an economic disaster. I mean, what we've got is many, many more old people who aren't economically productive, and young people who are really not eating healthily. And it's going to cost the nation a lot of money in health.
Exactly. Susan Carter says, with food pantries being busier than ever, isn't there an opportunity to tie in cookery classes to this resource?
With what did you say?
Given that we've got masses of food banks now, you know, and we won't argue about being them, but putting cooking classes in there.
Well, do you know, I think that is happening. I heard about, I think, is it First Bite in Scotland? I believe, I'm not sure, but I think they run cookery classes alongside food banks. But you know, Sheila, one of the things that really upsets me is all the best efforts, you know, the best efforts in school, like chefs in schools, or you know, what the Soil Association is doing, all those things in schools, in hospitals, in prisons, all the best stuff is done by charities. And thank God for them, because otherwise nothing would happen. But what doesn't happen is take up from government, because eventually you won't get, every food bank won't be able to run a cookery school. But if government put some money into it, they would. And the same in prisons. I was talking last week to a woman who's a governor of a prison, and what she's doing in this prison is fantastic. It's not just the sort of wonderful clink restaurants where outsiders come in and eat in the prison, and that gives money and training to the thing, but also actually teaching the inmates how to cook, not for the, but you know, there's all, the problems are enormous. The unions don't like it. There's basically, when you look at why does something obvious doesn't happen, it's usually that there's some vested interest body that doesn't want to lose their job or feel that they will lose their job. But actually their job could just change. Make them into teachers, not cooks.
Exactly. Well, most of the others seem to be telling you how wonderful you are.
Can we have a lot more of them?
I think we could all, I mean, I just have so many more questions for you, and I've enjoyed this very much. And, you know, perhaps I'm a bit less daunted now, but thank you very, very much, Prue. And
I've been such a gas bag. That's been impossible for you. You're trying to hurry.
no man would ever sit there and after I'd said how marvelous they were, and he would say, "I'm sorry, I've been a gas bag." So some things you haven't learned in your 80 years. You still think you're a, what did you say you thought you were? An imposter. Well, you're not an imposter, obviously. Anyway, back to you, Jackie, and thank you very much indeed.
That was lovely fun. Thank you.
Oh, that's been great. I did want to field a question here. There's a lovely question from Jen, one of our dames at LDE London, and she'd like to know whether there's one thing, Prue, that you wished you had said yes to or possibly no to during your career. That's a big one, isn't it?
Golly. I've hardly ever said no to anything I didn't want to do. No, I'm not regretted it. I mostly have just done what I like, really. And happily, I've liked a lot. And a lot of things have gone wrong. People think I've been nothing but a success because that's what you see. But, you know, I once started a vegetable company which went south, and I set up catering in Hyde Park, which lost so much money I had to give it up. So I'm not the great success I look.
Prue, let's just finish on a desert island dish. If you were cast away in that fashion, what dish or dishes could you not live without? What would you be?
Well, do you know, if I was on a desert island and I only could have one dish,
yeah,
I think I would have the Lebanese mujadara, which is basically lentils and onion. It's the most delicious peasant dish in the world. It's lovely. You fry the onions a lot and you stick the lentils in, tons of garlic, lots of parsley. It's lovely. I'd have mujadara, or I'd have a Cambodian salad. You know, I have an adopted Cambodian daughter, and she taught me this when we first went to Cambodia. And it's really, I think it's the same as a Thai salad or Vietnamese. They're all pretty much the same. But basically, you have all sorts of vegetable ingredients. You chop them very finely and you put a dressing on them, which is that classic sort of Asian mix of lemongrass, garlic, ginger, and soy sauce, and fish sauce, and pepper and salt, and a lot of lime. And it just makes anything taste fantastic. And so I'd like both of those, the Cambodian salad for lightness and health, and the lentils for, you know.
And Prue, what about a pudding?
Oh, what about pudding?
You know, as the great British Bake Off judge.
I think I'd probably have a pear tartare.
Oh.
You know, a tartare with pear, and then I'd like with it, I would like ice cream, cream, and custard.
You sound like my husband.
People always say to me,
I just wanted to. I see that Carolyn Steele has said, quoted you, but you're back at yourself. I've mostly done what I like in life. What a wonderful thing to be able to say.
But you know what? I genuinely am so grateful, because I've had such a good life. And I really think if the sword of Damocles came down on my head, and I mean, I would think, fair cop, you know, I've had too good a life. but I'm happy to have more.
Well, thank you very much. Okay.
Yes, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Prue. Thank you, Sheila. That's been a fabulous way to spend lunch.
Lay down. It's got to be,
Join us, Prue.
why not? I've never been asked. I didn't know about you, and I'm delighted to join you.
Absolutely right. You've got a few witnesses here. I'm holding you to that.
Right on.
That's lovely. Thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great session. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.